Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is August 3rd, and as usual, I'm joined by Western Standard news editor Dave Naylor.
Evening, Derek.
Corey, how you doing?
Good as ever. See by my big smile.
Yeah. Corey, happy guy. We've got a good show today. We're going to be talking about the first UCP Alberta debate. Who won it? Who lost it? Who's up? Who's down? And of course, the Western Standard debate that's coming up just this coming Tuesday. Big bucks for Miss Hinshaw. Miss Hinshaw, Alberta's chief medical officer, raking it in. Big, very controversial bonus payments going to her, approved by the UCP cabinet. And Jason Kenney's long goodbye. He forced out by his party. Leadership race taking place right now to replace him, and sitting around like nothing's happened. And we're going to talk about really what's he up to, because these are not the actions of a leader of a party who's been shoved out. It's very unusual. Before we get started, though, we need to thank my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I've been a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association for over a decade because I trust them, my annual membership dues, to defend my rights as a gun owner. CSSA is on the front lines, helping politicians to craft smart and reasonable gun and firearm regulation in Canada, and very importantly, working on education so that Canadians understand it. Most non-gun owning Canadians think gun owners are weird. Why do you want a gun? What do you need one for? Well, we may as well just ban them. We may as well make it as difficult as possible for law-abiding gun owners to have them. That's how a lot of them think, unless they're educated. We need groups like the CSSA doing what they do. If you're not a member of the CSSA, right now, go to CSSA-CILA.org and become a member. Join the thousands of people from coast to coast who have signed up as CSSA members to defend your gun rights. Okay, let's jump into it. Actually, pretty much right around the time we did the pipeline last week, we didn't get a chance to actually comment on it because it was taking place almost at the same time. The United Conservative Party of Alberta held a leadership debate in Medicine Hat at the, what's it called, a Halo? What's it?
It's a big airplane hangar.
No, it's a helicopter hangar.
Rescue helicopter.
What are they called?
Halo.
Yeah.
Rescue helicopter.
I think the helicopter won.
The helicopter got a lot of great reviews, whereas the sound for the debate got a lot of lousy reviews. It was terrible. And as Todd Lowen pointed out after the debate, the party took in more than $1 million from leadership fees, but they couldn't even get an internet connection. It was just terrible.
Well, was that just Medicine Hat's fault, or was that the UCP?
Always blame the UCP when in doubt.
Blame the government.
Blame the government, stinking government. Not easy to really pick a winner or a loser. Certainly the most airtime seemed to go to Danielle Smith because candidates were allowed to choose who they would like to debate, and you always want to choose the front runner. So it basically seemed to come down to Brian Jean and Danielle Smith arguing over her Sovereignty Act.
Mm-hmm.
And
everyone arguing with her.
Yeah, everybody
except for Todd
arguing
Lowen.
with her. She did okay defending herself, I thought. So if you're the front runner, which I think she is, and you don't do anything to shoot yourself in the foot, I think it's considered a victory.
Corey, obviously all shots fired at Danielle Smith. Who do you think came on top? You wrote a column about this.
Yeah, no, I thought Smith came on top for sure. And not only just the positions, but strategically. And I think the group figured it out a little later, but they kind of blew it at first. I mean, it wasn't shocking to see all guns trained on the leader. Okay, that's fine. But the way that format was set up, there were 7 candidates. They really limited who could speak. They would say, okay, you've got this issue, and then you pick a person to debate with, and we get 4 more minutes with it. Well, the first 2, it was Sonny and Schulz both picked Smith. Well, Danielle's a very good communicator. And I mean, it's one thing to attack her, but when you suddenly give her 2 minutes to enunciate at length about her policies and defend her policies, you're helping her. You're giving her more time, and she's very effective with it. And so, I mean, I'd say the first half of the debate, because the other candidates constantly picking her and giving her responses, Smith was taking up over half of the speaking time. I think they figured it out in the later half because they weren't picking her that much anymore.
Yeah.
But it allowed her, she remained unruffled and just kept carrying on with her messaging and it just made her look solid while the others were clearly in attack mode. I think she definitely came out on top.
Campaigns normally strategize about these things depending on what the rules are, and you're going to operate within the rules and strategize to get maximum effect on these things in advance. It blows my mind that none of the campaigns seem to think that, well, everyone's going after her, and this is just going to make her look more like the leader by having everyone go at her. The sole exception to that, at least from what I saw when the video wasn't cutting out, was Todd Loewen. He went after Travis Taves over a few missing $1 billion as identified by the Auditor General, went after him on a few of these fronts. How well do you think, I guess maybe let's go through, we've been talking about Smith because all the attention was on her, but let's talk about, actually let's talk about Todd Loewen first, and then we're going to go into the other two front runners, if you can call them that. Todd Loewen was the only candidate, Dave, who didn't seem fixated on Smith.
No, keep in mind he's probably fixated on being kicked out of the UCP caucus, so he'd like to get back in there and wreak havoc, so to speak. But he quite, he picked his targets at Travis Taves, and he wanted to focus people on the fact that Taves was a member around the inner cabinet. He helped make all these decisions about lockdowns and everything that the province has been through in the last 2 years, and he wanted people to know that, hey, Taves had a big hand in it. And that's pretty smart way to go about it.
Corey, there's two other candidates who were there who conceivably could win. I mean, I think it's fair to say Smith is in the lead, but I think it's far from a lock at this point. Brian Jean and Travis Taves. How do you think Brian Jean first fared from this? Like, what was his objective going in, and do you think he met it?
I think he might have. I mean, part of it was the way things landed. Smith came out outstandingly, just the way they basically gave her that time. But the other debate performances were fairly solid. I mean, Jean was getting his message out. He's in a hard place because he's giving he's talking to the same crowd as Smith, and he's got a very similar message to her. And to try and distinguish himself from that was difficult. Though again, he tried to speak over the moderator at one point just to fire in one quick shot about Danielle Smith's cancer statement, and it looked kind of petty towards the end of things. And again, it gave Danielle an opportunity to apologize to people she'd offended and offer sympathies because of Jean's son who passed away from it recently. So he was okay in it. Certainly better than he did in the general election debate of some years ago when he had what was the term that Ian Robinson had given to it? I just remember seeing that in his column when it said he called it a ghastly performance by Brian Jean, and that just stuck. You don't see that word used often for a debate. So he's most improved as far as that went.
Yeah.
Dave, Smith was anticipating that her cancer comments were going to come up in this because it was just, I think, a few days before this debate. She was anticipating this. She tried to inoculate herself, like during her opening statements and whatnot. She's like, can I take a moment to address this? She kind of put it up front, trying to inoculate herself. But all of the candidates, I guess, had their kind of written down kind of jabs at her already ready to go, and they went anyway. Do you think any of those jabs landed, or do you think maybe they didn't come off so well because she had tried to inoculate herself and they just kept on talking about the same thing over and over and over, as if no one had even spoken?
It kept giving her a chance to apologize again, which she also did in the media scrum afterwards. So it seems to me to be Derek was, because of good communication, it's basically been a one-day wonder scandal. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there'll be much lasting damage done, if at all.
Let's talk about Travis Taves. One of the front runners. He's got kind of the backing of most of the Kenney establishment behind him. Totally unknown, though, by most Albertans. Like, unless I'm not even convinced the majority of UCP members really know who he is, but he's known in the inner circles, but not broadly by Albertans, and I think not by many UCP members. I got to think going into there, his strategy or his goal in this debate is to make himself known and to stand out in some way and kind of get out of under the shadow of Smith. Corey, do you think was that his goal? And do you think
I agree it's the goal.
Meeting it?
And I think he did okay. I mean, he came in solid. People did get to know him a little because they didn't know him at all before. So I think people watching the race closely at least realize, and they're looking into this man, who is this guy? I've kind of heard the name now and then. he's in a really tough spot. He's got a campaign against his own record, in a sense, as an establishment candidate without torpedoing his own party at the same time. And he's got a juggling act. And he used it like so many other candidates, though, rather to avoid it, was to shoot outward at Smith, which you can understand strategically why, but I don't think that should be a priority of his. Tearing down Smith, let Sonny continue as she has with that and stick to explaining to people who you are, Mr. Taves, because he is a solid candidate. He's not full of flash and excitement, but he's well-spoken and intelligent, and he can make a case for himself. I think he did all right.
Dave, if Travis Taves' goal was to just be known, do you think he wasted his opportunity by maybe firing shots at Smith rather than maybe profiling himself, considering it should have been well expected that everyone was going to be taking shots at Smith? Do you think it was a missed opportunity by him going the offense rather than trying to introduce himself more?
Unless he realizes his candidacy's in a bit of trouble and trailing, and it was sort of like a desperate pitch. But if I'm Danielle Smith, I'll keep repeating the same three words: Sky Palace dinner. You were there. You're a Kenney henchman. You're a Kenney crony. And that he cannot he can't get rid of that picture. He can't erase that memory. So. That will link him forever to the Jason Kenney government.
Okay, well, let's shift gears just a tiny bit here. This coming Tuesday, so next week, we've got the UCP Frontrunners debate coming up, hosted by the Western Standard here in Calgary. You can get your tickets right on the Western Standard site. You go to westernstandard.news. You'll see right along the top UCP tickets or UCP debate tickets. Click on there. You can buy your tickets. It's only $20 to cover the costs of the evening. We've got a big hall there set up at Rooftop Calgary. So let's talk about what we expect here. We've had the first round of debates. I don't think it was terribly useful because it was the questions, when you've got that many candidates and it's official party debate, the questions are very bland. It's one question, if I could paraphrase, was after a very long intro, was what will you do to ensure that the world knows how clean Alberta oil is? Like very general questions. And when you got 7 candidates, you don't get a lot of good matchup. But now we're down. This debate's going to be just the top 3 who have a reasonable chance of making it to the final ballot. What are you expecting to see on Tuesday?
Oh, it'll be a much better debate, no question about it. 7's just too many.
Well, we're holding it. Of course it's
well,
better.
Of course it is, and I'm sure you're working on your questions already. But it can only be better. Less people equals better debating, better television, for lack of a better word. So I'm expecting good things. It's going to be a good show.
Cory, it's a big, when you go into these things, the campaigns, strategize, depending on who's on stage, what's the format, all of these things. This is a bit more of an open format. It's going to have more pointed questions, but most importantly, far fewer people on stage. What do you think, give me your idea of Taves and Jean. What's going to be their strategy in this debate coming up Tuesday?
Well, in this case, I think they might, ironically, they'll go after Smith again and even more because, again, it appears that they're trailing her and they really got to try and make up ground. Because the strategy is different now. You're not one voice trying to compete among 7. You've got more time to play with. You're going to get a lot of minutes of talking because you're just 3 voices throughout the course of this. So you can still speak and promote yourself and take some swipes to try and knock down Smith. Jean, again, he's so similar to Smith. He has to try and, I think, kind of explain why he's more trustworthy than to get this done, or why he might be more winnable in a general election. Like, those strategies got to come that way because their platforms aren't terribly different, though the Sovereignty Act is quite distinct. I mean, they're both very focused on regional autonomy. And Taves, again, same thing. He's got to make sure that he's saying, I'm the establishment candidate, but it shows that I'm experienced and I'm stable and I'm solid, but somehow I'm not one of the ones who was on the Sky Palace balcony. His own non-memorable status works to his advantage there, though, because if you ask people to list who was out in the Sky Palace, he was rarely a name that would come up. They'd speak of Jason
very
Nixon
lucky. I've never seen anyone so lucky about where they sat down for dinner. Because if the camera is here, he was like facing over here. You had to really work hard to figure out who he actually was in the picture. Whereas you saw Kenney, you saw Nixon, you saw Shandro, but yeah, he was off a little bit.
Kind of was next to the house plant over there. You didn't realize he was part of it.
Well, let's talk about decisions of the Kenney government. We're going to come to the long goodbye soon, but a lot of controversy around the bonus payments for Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta's chief medical officer. She was obviously a critical part in the Alberta government's decisions on lockdowns, on all sorts of restrictions, on vaccine passports, things that ultimately had the premier overthrown by his own party. Jason Kenney seems to disagree that she did a bad job, handed her a nice big fat bonus check, right?
He did. This was a program set up, Derek, to pay people bonuses in times of emergencies, in times of disasters. But they thought it would be things like fires, wildfires, and floods, things that maybe, take a week of 24/7 work, and then they move on. They didn't really count on a pandemic lasting 2 years, and 2 years worth of bonuses. So last year alone, Dina Hinshaw makes a pretty penny. She's got an important job, $363,000 a year. Her bonus.
That's base.
That's base.
That's a good base.
That is a very good base. It's bigger than my base. Her bonus was $227,000, more than $250,000, bringing her total income for 2021 to $591,000. Now, in fairness, she wasn't the only one who got a bonus. There were scores and scores of provincial officials who did. Thing is, nobody knows, and Rick Bell did a very good column on this today in the Calgary Sun. Nobody knows who signed off on them. Nobody knows how they came to be so large, and why didn't somebody say, excuse me, immediately. Canadian Taxpayers Federation attacked it, said that people who were getting, base salaries of $363,000 shouldn't be getting any bonuses whatsoever. Brian Jean attacked it. Danielle Smith attacked it. Travis Taves was initially silent. He was the finance minister, right? I mean, some documents would have surely been coming across his desk. Somebody should have brought up, hey, is $250,000 to Hinshaw really what you want to do? About 2 hours ago, he came out with a tweet. He said if he becomes premier, no bonuses without a ministerial sign-off. So I don't know if that's him passing the buck. He still hasn't publicly answered questions.
Actually, that's an interesting way to put it, because it's a way indirectly for him to say, but I didn't sign off on it as minister.
Exactly.
It's an interesting way to sidestep.
Should have been the health minister, maybe, or Tyler Shando or Jason Copping. So we'll see. Jason Kenney's been silent, and Travis Taves has been silent, not taking media questions. It's a lot of anger from a lot of people. You know what? Dina Hinshaw put in a large amount of work over 2 years. So did a lot of other people who didn't get any bonuses.
Yeah. Well, Jason Kenney's been silent on that, but he's not been silent in general. So we're going to talk about his long goodbye now. Back in the spring, Jason Kenney goes down. They cheated through the wazoo by changing the rules constantly, changing the goalposts, trying to get a favorable outcome as possible. And after changing the rules, God knows how many times, he comes out with, less than 50% or 51%?
51%.
Yeah, it was something outrageously low. He says, I'm gone as premier. There was a big fight in the UCP caucus. A lot of people said, it's time for you to go. The party needs to move on from you. You're holding the party down. We need to move forward in the future. We need an interim premier, an interim leader of the party in the meantime. Kenney fought through to stay as the premier in the meantime, and as the race goes on. Generally, when someone is an interim premier or in this kind of lame duck phase, they keep a low profile. They try to let the leadership candidates who are running for the job take the spotlight. That's the future of the party. It's been anything but that now. Yeah,
Jason Kenney seems to have reduced himself to the Twitterer-in-chief, if that makes sense. He'll occasionally put out tweets saying, this is good, and he may occasionally once a week attend a press conference. But other than that, he's kept I think he's kept a fairly low profile. Interestingly, John Horgan in BC announced he's not running in the next election, and he's basically doing the same thing.
Yeah, but he wasn't pushed out by his party or defeated in an election.
No.
He's got throat cancer. It's a very
Yeah.
different
Oh, yeah,
circumstance.
I understand
He didn't
that,
have his
but
own party calling for his head.
they're both lame duck premiers, basically. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Kenney, I thought he was going to stay on just so he could kiss the Pope's ring, being a very devout Christian. Obviously, he seems to be staying on now and will stay on until the leadership ballots are done. But I think he's going to spend the rest of the summer in hiding and try and keep out of the way.
Corey, Dave's got a different take than I do on this one. I don't think he's kept a very low profile, especially for a lame duck premier, a lame duck leader here. He was out at the Pope thing. He tried to make himself front and center at the Stampede. Lots of videos, lots of pictures showing himself out and about. This is very different than we saw. Like when you have a traditional lame duck premier, you had Dave Hancock succeed Alison Redford. She was pushed out, but there the party actually moved on. They had an interim premier in the meantime. But Dave Hancock had a relatively low profile. He was just trying to steady the ship and make sure the PCs didn't totally fly apart while they were having their leadership race. What's your take? Do you think Kenney's keeping a low profile or not?
Oh, I guess he's kind of in the middle. I mean, he could have gone into complete hiding for the interim and just ride it out. He hasn't gone forward and tried to stick in any legacy policies or jam something through in the last few
He
months.
announced an Alberta holiday. That's a legacy if you ever seen one.
It's not a stat holiday,
It's a token
so
thing.
nobody
No,
cares.
But he's taking stuff away. He's making announcements and stuff on a few things, and I'm sure the new leader is probably going to want to put a new face on the party. But
Granted,
I think he's trying to stamp some legacy stuff on.
I thought that was some nice high-level trolling. I mean, it was no coincidence. He picked the day that the NDP loves to celebrate Labor Day with their, shy of May Day. That's one of their big ones. And, this is Alberta Day today. It doesn't cost anything. It's not a new stat holiday. It was just him putting a finger into the eye on their. So that's him not being quiet. I mean, he's inviting some critique and stirring folks up. But again, it's not, bringing in a large new policy or something that you'd have to recall the legislature for.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question is what is expected, because it's such a weird, unprecedented long goodbye with a lame duck premier. Anyways, we don't have a lot of examples, as you said. When Redford left, you had Hancock in there, or with Horgan on the way out, it was on his own choice.
Let us know in the comment section. Does anyone know what was his first name? Hancock.
Dave
Hancock. Does anyone know who Dave Hancock was? Or did you know who Dave Hancock was before I just mentioned that he was an interim premier?
His portrait is hanging in the legislature as
if you're premier for a day, you get up there.
Absolutely.
You just have to have one day, because technically there is no such thing as an interim premier. There is one. He was one in effect, but that's not an official thing. But I want to know in the comment section, do any of you know who Dave Hancock was?
He made his mark and went with, he was education minister for a long time, and political weenies knew about that. But other than that, not many people would say that's in the list of portraits in the legislature at this point, that's for sure.
Well, I don't know from either of you. Do you think him sticking around is helping or hurting the party? Is it stopping it from maybe moving forward or renewing itself without the shadow of the old leader sticking around? Or do you think him sticking around provides more stability, that you're not having too much chaos and churn in the government while the leadership race takes place?
That's an interesting thought. I never really thought of it, but you can see he can keep that cabinet under a fair amount of control a lot more while he's in there. And it also kind of keeps them from really firing their guns at him so much during the leadership race. As I said, you're trying to distance yourself from the old administration while presenting yourself as new, but without torpedoing yourself. If Kenney wasn't in there holding on to any remnant of power whatsoever, they might be actually really shredding him a hell of a lot in this race right now, and they're going to keep it a little quiet because, hey, he's still in the room. So,
and never mind just shredding Kenney, they may, have a rush of blood to the head and do something stupid, bring in some, stupid program or something.
Yeah, there's always that.
I think it also gives him at least a small degree of control over the leadership race. It's no secret that Kenney probably doesn't want either of the two frontrunners who called for his resignation, Danielle Smith or Brian Jean. He probably doesn't want those people to succeed him. He probably is looking for his former finance minister, Travis Taves. And you saw like an unprecedented intervention in the leadership race from Taves's interim replacement, Jason Nixon, who is finance minister in the meantime, blasting Smith and the Sovereignty Act in pretty harsh terms from a sitting minister in the government. I can't recall seeing that. If you have that kind of intervention into a leadership race, normally you have to leave the cabinet to do it. So I think Kenney sticking around gives him at least a few levers on it. Also means that the party machinery is a bit more responsive to him as leader, whereas if he had left, he'd have no control over any of that.
It means, it's his last few months of power, and he's going to try and hang on to it as long as he can, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it. I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, I'm asking you to step up and support independent Western media. The Western Standard refuses to take a dollar of the federal Liberal government's media bailout. We do this as a private online newspaper. We do this, we exist because of a bit of advertising and sponsors, but mostly because of memberships, subscriptions. Your subscriptions have allowed us to massively expand over the last year and a half. And if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, I'm asking you to step up. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. Step up and become a member. Go to westernstandard.news, click on become a member, click on membership, and join up. You're going to get unlimited access to all Western Standard content, and you're going to be supporting independent Western media that refuses to take a penny of the federal government's media bailout. We're one of probably less than half a dozen significant media outlets in the country that do that. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.